You're listening to Podium Podcast with former England rugby player Tom May and leading performance coach Simon Hartley. From locker room gossip to fascinating high-performance insights, this is the show that invites some of the biggest names in the world of sport to discuss life on and off the field of play. Podium Podcast is brought to you by True Potential. To find out more, visit www.tpllp.com.
Simon, I'm looking forward to this podcast because this guy has done transition slightly differently. Mark Foster, I think he's probably played over 80-odd games for Gloucester, spent some time with Exeter, then moved to Jersey and had a fairly long professional career. But what really excites me most is the way that he's managed his transition.
Absolutely, and become incredibly successful in a field that I suspect not many rugby players end up exploring. They might go into finance, but not in the way that he has. So, yeah, I'm really interested to see how he's found his way there and how he's found the experience as well.
Gloucester fans will love this. Let's get cracking.
Let's do it.
Mark Foster, how are we?
Very good.
It's almost like you and I got the memo today. We're all in black. Two of us are grey haired and one's got ginger hair. So
there's got to be a joke around that somewhere, isn't there?
somewhere. Former Gloucester, Exeter Chiefs, Jersey, played for England Sevens. Slightly different life now, but first of all, how are you doing?
I'm good. I am. I'm busy. I have a young family to support and look after. Work is, as you said, is slightly chaotic, but part of an incredible business that's really kind of changing things in the sports ecosystem. And then just kind of enjoying life post rugby, enjoying having my Saturdays and kicking back and watching rugby as opposed to getting my head stuffed up my arse. So it's good. We're kind of in the process of moving out of London, get down to Surrey, and taking on all the fun stuff. I'm 40 this year, so it's big changes.
Nice. Sounds good. Talk to us about your retirement. When was it that you retired and how have you, aside from what you've been doing, how did you find that transition process?
God, that's a big question. I retired in 2015. So I was coaching Jersey at the time and playing for Jersey. I was really lucky to be offered a job over there. I kind of, when I went to Jersey, it was with half an eye on kind of realising I had no degree. I wanted to work in finance. I was quite financially literate, and I'd done some kind of early qualifications. And it was obviously a lot easier to get a job in Jersey than it was in London. So the process is quite daunting. I think I was lucky that I kind of prepped for it a bit. I was working my days off, and while I was still playing, on a Thursday, Wednesday, guys normally just going either chasing girls around town or go to the cinema or whatever they didn't do it at home on their own. And I was kind of going into an office and putting a suit on. Luckily, I actually met my wife in Jersey. She was working for their London office, but would come over to Jersey. And so I kind of knew what I wanted to do and kind of what space I wanted to work in. And then was just really lucky that I was coaching the Colts, I think, at the time. And a lady called Jennifer Le Chevalier was working for a business called First Names, which is now IQEQ, and said, come and work with us. I think, you're a really interesting person. I think you've got a lot to offer, and we can put you through some professional qualifications. So in that respect, it was less painful than it originally kind of envisaged, and worked really hard and got to see some really cool things very early in my career. Did a lot of kind of offshore, onshore tax planning and lots of kind of disposals of businesses and acquisitions of different asset classes. And then kind of, I think my wife and I were sat on a beach somewhere in Greece, and there was a conversation had where one of us should move, and I'm not moving to Jersey. I was like, okay, fine. And I actually wanted to move back to London. So it was great. So I, came into London, interviewed a few different businesses, very lucky to get a job with Smith & Williamson. And I'd done a few of my accounting qualifications and some of my investment management qualifications. And they kind of sat me down and said, look, we are, a big, obviously big advisory business. We only really support ACA, to be a chartered accountant. I was like, yeah, brilliant. So I got a few exemptions for my exams, and then kind of ensued 18 months, probably the toughest 18 months of my life. I think these exams, generally people do them after university, and you're already in that kind of mindset, and you do them over 3 years. And I was 32, 33 at the time. And luckily had, incredibly supportive families and wife or girlfriend at the time. So I just kind of got my head down and was working, for 40, 50-hour weeks, and then having to study for 3-4 hour exams every 3 to 6 months. And, very, very supportive business, and kind of got through those as quickly as I could, and moved to Deloitte to work in their real estate M&A team. When I, literally just finished in fact, I hadn't even got the results of my last exam and moved across there. They took a leap of faith with me, and they I think it's a slightly different narrative when you're a bit older, and you're I think when they want to look at how you relate to kind of clients and, more senior stakeholders in the business, a lot easier for them to have a conversation with a grey-haired 35, 36-year-old at this point, as opposed to a, whippersnapper who's just come straight out of uni. So, the trend, and then kind of, you go on from Deloitte and, and I worked for some big property developers, and then the LIV opportunity came about. So going back to the kind of the exit from rugby, it was, I probably managed it better than I've seen a lot of other people manage it. And that sounds like I'm blowing my horn a little bit, but I think I always knew when I started rugby that at some point there would be some pain. If I wanted to have a certain lifestyle and live in, a nice house, nice car, etc., I would have to work hard, be it in business or studying at some point. So it feels like that hopefully now is done. And the really kind of brutal studying piece has gone, and now it's just like you're just qualifying my experience, and you're just looking at, in fact, that my route to market and kind of my experience is actually one of the biggest facets as to why I work in the business now, because people normally are quite specialist in finance. You are an auditor, you are a tax advisor, you are a banker, you're an analyst, you're a trader, whatever it is. And I did lots of different things as I was coming out of rugby. So I worked offshore, I worked in tax, I worked in advisory, worked in M&A and corporate finance a little bit. You run teams and being a director of corporate finance for finance, being a financial controller and being technical, and the ability to pull all of that together and then kind of work in fast-paced teams, which you kind of get from the rugby. Being able to do all of that together is what really kind of allows me to do my job now, where you have, hyper fast growth business, big team evolving very quickly, and kind of how to pull that all together and work, whilst delivering events in a monopolistic market, and trying to do something really innovative in golf.
Yeah. Going back to your experience as a player and coach, because you're right, there are some. Yeah. Obviously, you've got to go and do the exams and all of that sort of stuff to get your knowledge base up. But what particularly did you take from your coaching experience that you kind of use now, the human skill element of it?
God, loads of things. I think working with a coaching team to kind of deliver a shared objective is a huge one. But listening, I think, is the biggest one. Anyone who knows me, and as acutely aware on this podcast, I talk for England, get it from my wonderful late mother, who is a very, very loquacious Scouser. And so the ability to have to stop and listen to people and realize that actually you are only as good as the sum of your parts. And if, the sum of your parts need to have an opinion in order to kind of get to where you want to all go to together. The big skill as a coach is kind of shaping and molding that, and getting people to align with a common goal, on lots of different levels, from a technical perspective, from an effort and kind of buy-in perspective, but also, more philosophical as well. And just kind of are you the right person to be on this journey with us? So there's a whole host of things. I mean, I was really lucky in Jersey. I had Ben Harvey and then Harvey Biljon, but then also Steve Bowden and Jake Alaka around me, who were we were all a similar age at the time, kind of mid-30s, and everyone had different points to prove. And, we had probably a slightly, different approach to other more traditional coaching setups at the time. And I was in and out of playing still, and doing studying and kind of half an hour and retiring. And so they were just incredibly supportive on me. And so, when you're building teams now certainly in our team at LIV, the people I hire, and my direct reports are, all similar kind of mindset. They're very, very technically smart. And this is a common theme amongst all my friends as well. Lots of very, very smart people, but lots of very, very hardworking people, and also people who can have really switch off and have fun. I think, we spend a lot of our lives working, and I want to work with people who are similar mindsets, who have the ability to, flip between very technical conversations and very stupid conversations very quickly, because that's the way I am. And it's not everyone's cup of tea. Some people want to have just they're at work, it's very technical and very serious. I wear shorts and flip-flops to work, and I, will in one sentence be having quite complex conversations about quite difficult topics, and then the next one taking the mickey out of someone, playfully, obviously, for doing something silly. And I having that initial kind of experience with a coaching group like that, where it was, okay, what's the goal today? What's the target? What's the week? Is it this block? And then translating that into how you deliver a function within a multinational. Has huge synergies for me, and so much of rugby. I still speak to Rob Baxter quite a lot about these things, where his methodology when I was at Exeter, exactly the same, brand new coaching setup. And I got there the year him and Ali Heath started. They're still there, so they're obviously doing something right. They've got a handful of premierships and Heineken Cups under their belt, and produced some of the best young players that that England's ever seen. So I think I'm a sum of my parts. I had Dean Ryan at Gloucester and Nigel Melville, who are like incredible coaches. Very different. Dean is off the pitch one of the nicest, most humble blokes you'll ever meet in your life. On the pitch, absolutely horrible human being. Even in training, I remember watching him doing live mauling and rucking with the forwards when he was a slightly younger man, until I think Pig Buxton fell over him and almost snapped him in two.
He was manhandling Johnny Wilkinson one day, and I sort of fairly lamely went in to help. And he just grabbed me by the collar and he said, "You've made my fucking day, schoolboy." Never
sounds about right.
Heard in my whole life.
Yeah, he's a terrifying human. But then you meet him off the pitch, and he's he is genuinely one of the most down to earth, intelligent, driven people. And obviously doing a great job at Dragons now with Luke Narroway.
We hope you don't mind us interrupting the show with a very short message about our partners at the Podium podcast, True Potential. True Potential provide wealth management that's simple, effective and unique. Their expert advice, innovative investments, leading technology and dedicated support are all designed to help you do more with your money. Visit www.tpllp.com now to find out more. Capital at risk. True Potential Wealth Management and True Potential Investments are authorised and regulated by the Financial Conduct Authority. Thanks for listening. Now, let's get you back to this week's show.
You talk about all the different experiences, and actually it almost feels like the stars have aligned in your transitional process. So actually, aside from the exams and the grit and the graft that you have to get through to get to that point, from a navigational point of view, you're fairly set on your line, and it all sort of played quite nicely into where you are now.
Yeah, no, 100%. Like, I'm the first one hand up and say, like, I'm incredibly lucky to do what I do now. And so I kind of take a step back now sometimes and look at, we're moving back to the village I grew up in Surrey, and to have so many people come out of rugby, and it's so tough, and they really struggle because they don't either don't know what they want to do, or they don't necessarily have the right skill set or the experience. I was very lucky where I grew up. I kind of knew roughly where I wanted to be in the world and what I wanted to do, and I think there's an element of kind of really enjoying the journey. I think when I went to Gloucester, and I sat with my father, and I had a place at Bristol to go and study, or go and sign pro for Gloucester, and he was like, well, you can go to university anytime, but you can only be a pro rugby player, now. So go and do that and see how it goes. And I was 13 years pro, so I was like, oh Christ, okay. But yeah, you're right, Tom. It's kind of it has hugely aligned for me. But I think it's what you make of the journey for me. Like, you go to Gloucester, you work hard, you hang around with good people. We're very lucky to have incredible friends still from both kind of clubs, all three clubs I played at. And then while you're doing that, you're always in the background. So very, very early in my career, I was doing my IMC. So I was kind of studying for like investment management qualifications. And then when I was at Exeter, I did a bit of work with a guy called Nick Sprague, who owns Frobish's Juices and Cobalt. We used to own Cobalt, which is a massive kind of import and export fruit business. And we looked at what we were having at work, and we were using Beat It and Cherry Active and paying like crazy money for it. And Paddy Anson, who was the S&C coach at the time, I was chatting to him, and I said, if I can get that cheaper for you, like, do you want it? And because it is just like blue, it's beetroot juice, and you've got Montmorency cherry juice. And so we went back to Nick, who was a good mate, and we kind of played golf together, and was like, can we get this, thing? And it worked out like we were paying like £14 a litre, and he was like, I can get it for 50p a litre. I was like, okay, brilliant. I think there's something we can do here. And we ended up putting together a product and went round, kind of Matt Lovell advised on it, Dave Sylvester advised on it, and we had this product called PWR, which was kind of 40% beetroot, 40% Montmorency cherry, bit of coconut water, bit of blueberry juice, bit of cinnamon in there. And it was effectively just a carrier for like all of the, either pre-workout, you put in there, you put flavorless protein in there for recovery, have it pre-bed, nitric oxide levels, all these kind of things. And you start to, that was when I was at Exeter. So very early on, I was kind of thinking, it was always interesting to me, going out and seeing how things worked and understanding the real world outside of rugby, because rugby, I'm very acutely aware that rugby was a massive bubble. And I think I was lucky that I never as a kid really wanted to be a rugby player. There was never like a burning desire to be a pro rugby player. I just was big and quick, and was lucky enough to get a scholarship to Whitgift, and was exposed with Chris Kibble and Adrian Norris to really high level schoolboy rugby, and ended up playing for my country at 18, and then you're on the roller coaster then, and off you go, and lots of different clubs going, come here. And so we almost went to Irish, almost went to Saracens, had a long chat with Dusty at Leicester, and ended up at Gloucester with like a handful of guys I played in the schoolboys with. And then you're often saying, but then every time you're looking, and I'm just that way inclined, rugby gives you incredible ability to meet people. So whenever I'd meet people on golf days, on after dinner, matches in boxes, I'd be like, what do you do? And anyone who was interesting, I always kind of kept in touch with, and maybe went to see them, talk about what they do. And just there's so much you don't know when you're playing rugby, because you're never exposed to the real world. You're told, eat, sleep, shit, train. So you never really see like what's out there. So many guys come out and they don't know what they want to do, because they just don't know. And someone says to me, I had a young guy the other day come out, who was one of the ex-Worcester players, and was like, I want to work in finance. I was like, that is the broadest. In finance, there are 500,000 jobs in 500,000 different businesses in 600 countries. Like, you need to kind of what in finance, what parts interest you. Do you? And so there's, I think I never wanted to be an accountant particularly. Like, I don't like putting together accounts. I've worked in tax for quite a long time, and I don't, particularly love technical tax work. For me, it was the bringing it all together, and that the same thing as why I enjoyed coaching and why I enjoyed playing was being the sum of those parts and doing something which is really interesting, that your kind of technical knowledge can input across lots of different verticals, and then the ability to kind of pull that together, then pull teams around you, and then to go and achieve strategic goals. That's the kind of the huge transition from rugby into the real world, which I absolutely love doing, and I learn every day on it. It's a non-stop learn.
You mentioned enjoying the journey, which is, for a lot of people, it's a cliche, because they understand the words, but they don't really genuinely enjoy their journey, and they probably don't know how. I was reflecting on this one. For me, I think being curious and following my curiosity has been a huge part of just enjoying the process. Is that something that you found? Is it something that kind of resonates?
Yeah, hugely. I mean, rugby, it's changed a lot. When Tom and I started playing, it was, I remember my debut as a kid sitting down with two very large props. On a Saturday, we played a Sale on a Friday night, played opposite Steve Hanley, terrified. Nigel Melville. Good news is you're starting on the weekend. Bad news is on the wing. Okay, never played the wing in my life. I was just a very quick 12 at the time. I said very quick, a moderately quick 12. And Steve Hanley was like, one of the greatest wingers in Premiership history at that point, and he's also an absolute mountain of a man. Luckily, we won. I had very, very talented backline around me. Henry Paul, Robert Todd played in the centre, Tinas Delport played at fullback, James was standing on the other wing, Gommers was at 9. So it's a very nice environment to come into. And both Exeter and Gloucester are very traditional clubs in that regardless, everyone has a drink after the game, and it's family, and it's it's very tightly bonded. I think to some clubs that's probably missing, in my personal opinion, from modern rugby a little bit. I think those, Dean Ryan actually put it the best. He said, I don't miss rugby, I miss the 10 minutes after a big win. And that is, everyone's done everything, put their body on the line. And that for me was like psychologically the most enjoyable part of rugby. Am I a massive fan of preseason? Not really. Do I like playing? Yeah, I love playing. I love the 10 minutes afterwards. I love the nights out. I love the away trips. I love that, the bond that creates. The curiosity piece was what kind of always sat outside of rugby for me. So like over the years, I've just followed. Rugby gives you the flexibility financially to kind of go and follow your dreams a little bit, especially at a young age. You're getting paid well, in your early 20s, for example, and you can travel, you can do interesting things, you can buy interesting assets, you can, do things that are generally not available for people of that age. We went on stag do's to exotic parts of the world and to parties that we had really, frankly, no right being in, and behaved like we were 21-year-old rugby players in there. Andy Hazel stag do, classic example. I have photos of being very young and being at a white party in Nicky Beach, I think the opening party of the season. And these are just obviously like 8 or 9 very, very large rugby players, stick out like a sore thumb, dressed all in white, having the biggest night out known to man. Everyone around them was a very sober night out. And that rugby gives you that flexibility to explore those curiosities. I think to me, it meant that I could really balance, the training. So, the reason why I started working was because Mike Anthony, who's the S&C coach when we were at Gloucester, who is an All Black, S&C legend, I think is head of high performance for the All Blacks at the moment, is still by a mile one of the most technically brilliant people I've ever met in my life in terms of actually training human performance and also psychological performance. He was like, someone came to him, they're like, I'm worried about burnout. And he kind of did some stats and they were like, you work 13 hours a week. Like, what are you worried about burning out from? And so kind of that really struck a chord with me. And I was kind of like, well, if I'm only doing 13 hours a week, and at the time I was like, I'm so busy. And I realized I was just coming home, just like, you're filling your time with just garbage. And so, just started to kind of what actually interests me, and started, reading more and exploring more, and, doing weird and wacky things with friends, and, meeting new people. Some really strange, like you go back to when we put Gloucester and we used to play World of Warcraft, and you had like a handful of like British and Irish Lions and like current internationals all playing World of Warcraft on away trips. And like, this is so weird and strange. But at the time, that curiosity, was brilliant, because it gave you like, it's such an all-encompassing, weird kind of PvP game where people play in like weird fantasy around. Very strange.
Every club has its own different sort of nuance on that.
Exactly.
We had Risk.
Yeah, exactly.
At the time, someone just got the hump and smashed the ball across the thing.
But it's important, because it is, sport, especially rugby, because it's it's such an intense like collision sport, is totally all consuming. And for the smart people, I feel like the most successful ones who have something significant away from rugby to kind of, be it family, be it friends, be it curiosities that they pursue. For me, I think education, for example, should be mandated to all academy players. I think they either have to do a trade or a degree when they're in academies, or even in the first team, because as we've seen recently, if things fall over for whatever reason, commercially they fall over, people snap legs, necks, knees, and that's it. You're done. People get all kinds of ailments from the sport, and not having something interesting, something you can do a step away from rugby, not having something you can fall back on financially, it's so important. And actually studying for me was brilliant, because I did my A-levels and then did nothing for a few years, and then going back to studying from my kind of early investment management qualifications was brilliant, because it ignited all the nerdy parts of my brain, because being a mathematician, but then also kind of you start to then see, how does your knowledge base fit into the real world. And I think the more curious you are, the more bases of knowledge you have, and therefore the more applications. And then I guess the dream goal for everyone is kind of taking all the fun bits and the stuff you learned over the years, and then being able to pull it all together into something that actually, then allows you to work in a job that you like, or you love, or you don't hate, which in then turn, allows you to have the lifestyle you want. The dream is always that, do a job you love and you never work a day in your life.
Simon, listening to Mark is like, it's very different to some of the other podcasts we've had. In fact, it's probably the only podcast we've had where actually someone has been so focused on getting to an end point. There's been a lot of people, myself included, that I sort of felt like I knew what I wanted to do, but it took me a while to realise what that was. It's really different, isn't it?
Yeah,
it almost marks the anomaly.
Yeah, and actually, there's a physical way to look at this. So we've chatted in the past about how, if you wanted to be a great rugby player, actually it helps when you're a kid to play some squash, play some football, do a lot of variety of kind of movement skills and ball skills and all the rest of it, because it builds up like the base of physical intelligence. Now, actually, kind of what Mark's describing is doing the same sort of thing, but with intellectual skills and intelligence. Stretching yourself in different ways, taking on lots of different things that give you the ability to be pretty flexible about where you go and how you go. And actually, when I look at what intelligence is often our ability to join the dots between disparate things. Something that you learned whilst you were doing tax, with something that you learned whilst you were doing accounting, with something that you learned whilst you were playing rugby, with something that you learned whilst you were coaching. And to be able to almost like amalgamate all of these things to meet the challenge that you've got in front of you. Physical intelligence is no different. It's all those movement skills that you learned whilst you were growing up as a kid that you now use to beat the player in front of you. And so this I think is one of those things that Mark's developed along the journey, which now helps him to like you say, kind of be able to plot that path, which other players, if you just came out professional sport and you thought, right, I want to go and be an architect or whatever, you could go and train in that discipline, but you don't necessarily have that broad base that Mark's just described of like development, of personal development.
Two points to that. The really tough one is when you come out of rugby is the financial piece, which a lot of guys struggle with. You go from getting 6-figure salaries, and all of a sudden someone's like, "We'll give you a 32 grand a year job." And I took like massive pay cuts from Exeter to Jersey. I took probably a 50% pay cut, and probably took another 20% when I actually went into the real world, which was brutal. And so a lot of guys, who have a lot of guys have young families, so like it's quite normal in rugby for guys to get married in the mid-20s, have children quite early on. I was very lucky that I met my wife after I was a rugby player, mainly because I was an arsehole when I was playing a rugby player, and have a 6-month-old daughter now, and I'm pushing 40, which for me personally, that's kind of the way I wanted to do it. I think I learned to kind of that multidiscipline when we were kids. So both my parents were PE teachers, and like both like very talented athletes in their own right. Like Dad randomly has a ton of caps for Jamaica rugby, and he's a tiny little white bloke. And my mum was like a national standard like trampolinist and netball player and lacrosse player. So as kids, we were never allowed computer games. So I have a little brother who's bigger than me. And he was just like, go and play with your brother. He's 18 months younger than you. So we had like every piece of sports kit known to man. It was like cricket bats, tennis rackets, golf clubs, frisbees, everything we could do. Mum came into school, taught gymnastics. So all of those things, and being able to kind of use those multidisciplinary skills, is definitely, it's fascinating you saying that, Simon, because that resonates so strongly with me that, there's no sports I've ever tried where I don't think I'm pretty good at. And I know through my rugby career, all the guys who are the best rugby players are incredible at every sport. Ian Bolshaw, classic example, like he is, very, very irritating northern man sometimes. I love him to bits. But he is one of the nicest people in the world. And he's got a wonderful family, and he obviously lives in the south of France now. But as an athlete, he is just a freak. Anything I've ever done with him, you watch him hit a tennis ball, you watch him hit a golf club, you kick a football around, just be a general athlete. And he's very successful now in his own right. And I think that's just no one's ever really put it like that. But I think people who do have multiple stimuluses, both physically, intellectually, gives them that really broad, rounded, physical or emotional or technical intelligence that allows them then to be. And I think, like, I never, to your point, Tom, I don't think I ever kind of knew I want to be, head of finance for a multinational sports business. At one point I thought, I'd love to work for the RFU, and then kind of realized that maybe it doesn't pay that well because they've got no money. Apologies, Simon, if you're listening. But at the same time, I take a step back and say, like, okay, right, well, CVC, across, 6 nations, European Cup, Premiership, and, okay, maybe that is a really interesting, business to go and work with, because, why invest in rugby? What can you, as an investor, move the needle at? And without having, all those different stimuluses, I would never be able to kind of piece together all the rugby stuff and understanding of rugby knowledge with what an investor actually kind of optically looks at when they're assessing whether to push money into investments or change structures.
One of the things you touch on there, Mark, is like, we've had a conversation before, haven't we? We had a coffee and we discussed all this. And some of the things that we talked about, because I've got some various different experiences in some of the stuff I've done since I've finished. You've got different experiences because of all the things that you've tried and built on your pathway to where you are now. Actually, some of our thoughts about where sport needs to evolve are very similar.
Yeah, 100%.
Because we're coming at it from a slightly different angle. And I think I put something on LinkedIn over having been to the big game at the weekend. Sport has to evolve. And I think it's that broader spectrum of understanding of different facets of life or sport or whatever it might be that actually allows you to stand back and look at something in a completely different light.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with that. I think rugby is obviously like huge under the microscope at the moment, though. And I think there's a lot of, what I'm doing now is kind of trying to learn the lessons from kind of where traditional kind of sport funding, especially, is still at. You look back, Worcester's gone under. Why did Worcester go under? Okay, well, Cecil Duckworth passed away a few years ago. Management changed. And the reality is, rugby clubs, for example, I know don't really wash their face financially on a Saturday. They make their money Monday to Friday. So how do you change that? And I think the Exeter model, if you look at it, Exeter, probably Northampton, do it very, very well, probably the best, because they own their own grounds. They have huge conferencing facilities. Exeter's got, a hotel now, for example, and they're still kind of on the breadline, but they are solvent. I think, sport generally, will have to change. They're gone are the days where someone just writes a massive check at the end of the year. That is not a solvent business, and it's, it translates. And so you have to make it commercially viable. And we're a startup in sport at the moment. And so it's kind of getting to that commercially viability that then translates into the fan experience, which is also what it comes down to. Like everyone at the moment goes to Twickenham and it's, whatever, £8-10 a beer, it's expensive, because people need to charge these prices. They can charge these prices because they've got a monopoly, obviously, because they control the entire F&B in Twickenham. However, if they were more commercially viable as a business, then they could actually say, okay, we can lower ticket prices, we can lower things, and guarantee 80,000 sold out every week, and make it just drive that demand in a different way.
The one thing you say there, which will bring us nicely onto where I want to talk about. Sport doesn't work if you've got someone that's just going to write a big fat check, unless it's LIV Golf, who have got a big. So look, we obviously know what the background to LIV Golf is. Just explain a bit about what you're trying to do, because you've sort of touched on it very briefly in the previous sort of half an hour. But give us a bit of an insight into what you're building.
Part 2 of this episode of Podium Podcast with LIV Golf's Mark Foster will be released next Wednesday. Same place, same time. Head over to beworldclass.tv to subscribe. Thanks for listening.
You're listening to Podium Podcast with former England rugby player Tom May and leading performance coach Simon Hartley. From locker room gossip to fascinating high-performance insights, this is the show that invites some of the biggest names in the world of sport to discuss life on and off the field of play. Podium Podcast is brought to you by True Potential. To find out more, visit www.tpllp.com.